Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. So, as you know, on my channel, I've been posting AQA videos, both international and the UK curriculum, on how you should solve various questions in the examination. So, I've also got this request that when I have the opportunity, I should explain the concepts also. So, today's class is going to be all about explanation of the first topic which is there in the international curriculum, Oxford International AQA. The very first topic is memory. In that, the first subtopic is MSM, multi store model. This lesson is going to be equally useful for the GCE AQA students because this lesson, it's the second lesson in your curriculum, but it is there and almost the same subtopics are there. Multi-store model, which I'm covering in this video, is definitely there in your syllabus as well. Okay, so let's understand about the multi-store model today. Before I do that, I just want to discuss about the official textbook in the Oxford International Curriculum. So you can skip the video a little if you're not interested in this. Why I'm discussing it is we know there's only one textbook available for the international curriculum. For the UK curriculum, there are many textbooks. So, what has happened is in the international book, there are lots of studies that are included. Every paragraph, I think, in that book has a study, and that's excellent because it really develops a scientific mindset. When you're studying, you really get to learn about how the findings which are there about any subtopic that we are studying have researchers come to those findings. So I'm very pleased, very grateful for the way the textbook has been written. But the challenge in that is when it comes to writing the examination, students feel we cannot remember so many studies. And the first question any student will ask me in my class is, do we have to remember all these studies? So I can give you a broad principle right now. And then, of course, we have to look at it topic by topic. The key studies which are given in the textbook, like in separate boxes, some of you would be surprised to know, even all of those you don't have to know for the paper. You should know, but there's no compulsion of knowing those. In your syllabus specification, I forgot to put it on the screen right now. It's been made very clear which studies you have to do, which are expected in the syllabus. For example, Ash's paradigm is there, or Milgram studies, then social influence. You have to do those because they are specified. So there can be particular questions in the exam paper which will be asked for those. But those studies which are not in the specification but are there in your textbook, those are not going to be directly asked in the paper. The broader topic under which they come would be asked in the paper, and then it's up to you whether you want to cover that study or not. Even without covering that study, if you can, have different points, the paper is flexible, which are equally good as that study. So without covering that study, you can get as good marks as a student does who is covering the study. So that's about the case studies. You don't have to know each of them, only the ones which are mentioned in the specification. Coming to in-text studies, there are so many text studies, little studies, like little I'm saying because they're summarized very briefly within the text. Not only in the evaluation, even in the description. Again, you don't need to know those. You don't have to. It is ideal that you should know about them, but you don't have to. Like I said, actually, we should look at it topically. If you're remembering those studies, then do you need to know the author's name? Mainly for the classic ones, usually they are covered under key studies, not always, but for them, we remember the author's names. Those which are just in text, we just remember one line of the procedure and findings. We don't remember the author's names. So, such general principles are there. Of course, everyone's learning and writing style is different. Now, what I'm going to do in this video is, because mainly it's meant for the international students, I am going to cover all the studies which are given in the textbook, because I know regardless of whether in the board you have to code them or not. In your schools they definitely expect, and teachers in schools can be a little inflexible about what you can write in the paper. Most of them will insist that how it's given in the textbook you have to write it that way only. So from that point of view, I am going to cover studies which are in the textbook as well, even the little ones which are there, and of course the key studies. It's good if even you do those studies, and you can make an informed choice about which of them you would like to cover in an answer and which not. And how to go about writing your answers, we have other videos for those. You can visit my channel for the other videos. There you'll be able to see some of the answers which I've written for the exams. I have made use of studies. For others, I haven't made use. So it is possible to answer questions, get full marks, even without covering every study which is there. That is what I want you to know. Of course, it's good if you learn about the studies. Okay, let's begin with the multi-store model today. What is memory in general? Memory, we often hear it is the process of encoding, storing, and retrieving information. I have a habit that whenever I explain something, whatever I have learned from students in my experience, the typical mistakes which they make, I like to point out those, because those are like frequently made mistakes that I want you not to make. So many students, when they are defining memory, they would say it is encoding, storing, and retrieval of memory. Don't give circular definitions. Whatever they ask you to define, the concept which they ask you to define, do not repeat it in its definition. Okay? And it is incorrect also to say that it is encoding, storing, and retrieval of memory. Memory is the process. What you are encoding, storing, and retrieving is the information. So make sure that you write correctly. Encoding means recording information. Storing means retaining information. And retrieving means recalling or bringing back to mind information. So all these three processes taken together collectively, they are called memory. So now by the definition only, you can see that it is quite a complex concept. It definitely requires explanation. So when the concept is so complex but so vital to cognitive psychology, we would want to know how and why it works. So many models or many theories have been presented to explain this process. One of the most famous earliest models to come is that by Atkinson and Shiffrin. It's called the multi-store model of memory. This recording, retaining, recalling information. Like when I'm learning information, that time also I'm making use of memory. When say I'm recalling it for the exam or in everyday life, I'm learning people's names. Then when they approach me, I'm remembering their names. All the time I'm using memory. It seems like quite a complex thing. So Atkinson and Shiffrin have really simplified the process and explained to us how and why it takes place. Their model, their theory of memory, their explanation, it is called multi-store model of memory. Now it is very important when we come across classic theories, classic models from an exam point of view, to remember who has presented that model. Regardless of whether they ask you in the paper or not, whenever you write about that model, you should name the researchers. And here, the frequently made mistake is when I ask who has given the multi-store model, students will say Baddeley and Hitch. Do not confuse between the researchers who gave the multi-store model and who gave the working memory model. Let us see what is the basic concept or how they have simplified the process of memory before we look at the details. According to this model, memory has been reduced to three separate storages. Memory is a collection of storages in this model which interact with each other. Now, if we talk about stores or storages, just like physically, when you want to say keep your files or books somewhere, you keep it in a store, you keep it in a drawer. Same way, of course, it's abstract. We don't have a physical drawer in the head where we are keeping things, but you can imagine that this abstract reality is analogous to that drawer where we keep files. So there are three such stores or three such places in the mind where we keep information. That is what Atkinson and Shiffrin have posited. These stores, according to them, are not fully passive, like they don't just hold information, they also interact with each other using two processes, which we'll see about soon: attention and rehearsal. Right now, we need to know what these storages are, what are these three different storages, and how they are distinguished. Each storage by itself is complex. So, we will get to know slowly. First, we can see their names. So, there is a sensory register, that's one store. There is short term memory, that's another store. And there is long term memory. So, we have to know these three names perfectly. Now, for simplification, these storage is always abbreviated. Like sensory register will be abbreviated as SR, short term memory as STM, and long term memory as LTM. You can use those abbreviations in the paper provided once you give the full form. So let's say you're writing a 6-marker answer. Initially, you can write these are the three storages full names in the bracket as written here. You can write the abbreviations, and then throughout you can keep referring to them as STM, LTM, and so forth. Atkinson and Shiffrin have agreed with the general definition of memory, which I just presented. I have already explained it to you. So let's just quickly mark here again. In the paper, they do ask questions, direct questions also for 1 or 2 marks. Define what is encoding, what is storage. So you should know the definitions of each. Preferably, you should know the definitions as they are given word to word. If not, use good terminology while writing. Such things I have explained in my exam videos. Now let's come to, this is the definition as such, specific components. Those are very important. We just saw there is a storage which is called sensory register. Now what is the sensory register? Let's look at that more closely. So for multi-store model of memory, first you have to know broadly what the storages are, and then you have to know all details of each of the storages. So far we have seen 3 storages. You must be seeing the model in your textbook, also a diagram. Here I am just drawing very roughly. So we have seen there's a sensory register, a short-term memory, and a long-term memory. As we keep on going through the text, we'll see the linkages between those also. Right now we are just focusing on understanding fully the first component. The definition of sensory register is that stage or that store in which sensory information is briefly held. We have 5 sense organs, as you know: eyes, nose, tongue, ears, and skin. On all these, you are capable of experiencing sensations. You can see with your eyes, smell with your nose, taste with your tongue, hear with your ears, and feel touch with your skin. Now, what you will realize is, for a brief amount of time, whatever information is coming on these sense organs, you're able to hold it. Simply saying, if you're seeing something, an image of what you've seen lasts for a little time before it goes away. Same way, if you're hearing something, the sound of what you've heard stays for a little time before it goes away. Similar is the case with the other sense organs. Let's say, for example, you're standing at your window and you're seeing the cars passing by. When you see a car passing by, say it's already gone away from your field of vision. You could see it just now, it's gone. But for a brief moment, you will realize that image is still there in your eyes. It's not that as soon as the car goes away, the image has disappeared. So that little bit of lasting of information that you've seen, or a sound you've heard, a little bit it lasts before it goes away. That is what is called sensory memory. And these sense organs, which are holding that information for little time, the eyes, ears, and all, these are called sensory registers. So these, your sense organs are only those stores in which whatever sensations are coming are briefly stored. So that is what Atkinson and Shiffrin meant by sensory register. Now, each sense organ is worth studying. We have 5 sensory registers in this sense, corresponding to each of the 5 sense organs. Each is worth studying, but in humans, the most dominant or the most heavily used is vision, followed by hearing. Human beings, most they make use of their vision, and then of their hearing. The remaining organs which are there, no doubt, we make use of taste, smell. We are not denying that. We make a use of it a lot. But because they are not the primary ones, they are not the most used ones, that is why research has been heavily focused on what we see, so the visual sensory register, and what we hear, the hearing sensory register. That's why those are covered in the textbook. We are in A levels. Right now we cannot study also everything in that much specification. So we just have to know about the primary ones. Now, there are 5 sensory registers. Like we saw the first one, which is there, the visual one. It is called iconic memory. How you have on your computer or on your mobile phone also those icons which represent various applications. So icons are what you see. So from that you can remember iconic register, meaning the visual register. Many studies have been done on the visual register, the iconic memory. We are going to see very soon Sperling's study. What has been found is whatever we see with this register, like I said, it lasts for a while, whatever we see before it goes away. The estimate has been that it lasts for about 0.5, meaning half a second. It's very, very important from a paper point of view to memorize any duration capacity coding which is given for any of the stores of memory, even the substores. Like iconic memory becomes one substore under sensory register. Even that you have to remember perfectly. You cannot just say it is very brief storage. You have to be able to say 0.5 seconds. So make sure to memorize these type of exact figures which are given. So when I see something, an image of it or that information will last for about half a second before it goes away. Now coming to echoic memory. Echoic memory means the sound memory which is there in ears. That is in psychology, whatever we hear, it's also called auditory information. Even in your chapter like schizophrenia, which you have, you will see that auditory hallucinations are referred to. Whenever you see a word like auditory, you should know it is based on hearing. So whatever we hear in our ears, there has been research conducted on that also. We will see very soon. Conrad's research, the most famous one. What they have discovered is through such research, when I hear something, it is held there in my ears for about 2 to 3 seconds. Then it passes away. Also, does information like really pass away, or is there some way of holding it for more time? We will see very soon when we look at short-term memory and the interconnection between sensory register and short-term memory. But as of now, what you need to know is that unless you really pay attention to what you're hearing or seeing, information will go away in this much time. So for example, let's say you're really focusing on studying and someone at the back is talking. So some people are talking behind you. Now you cannot avoid hearing. Your ears will pick up information. They are designed to catch sound related information. So their chattering will keep on coming in your ear. But what is happening? You are focusing on studying at that time. So that sound is coming for about 2 to 3 seconds. It will remain there and then it will just go away because you're not paying attention to what you're talking. It's just that the sound is coming. So when they say 2 to 3 seconds or 0.5 seconds, they mean in that much time it will be gone. Now, very important, coming to Sperling's research. In the textbook, it has been given in the form of a case study. And like I've said before, it is ideal. It's very good if you know about it and you can write it in the paper. It is not compulsory though. Many school teachers, like I've told you, for good practice in school, they will insist that you know about the study. From a board point of view, you can know it is not compulsory to remember this study. So keeping that in mind, we'll just learn about Sperling's research. As you'll notice, for sensory register topics, so many studies are given. This is not the only one. There are many such studies. Some point it becomes impossible to remember all of them, or even if you remember, even if you understand all of them, to write about all of them. That's why I want you to know that it is not that you have to remember all the studies. Of course, if you intend to write a few of the studies which will make for a good answer, you can give preference to case studies. Those are the more important ones. That is why they have been put in the boxes. And of course, evaluation depends which evaluation points you intend to take. Studies that are relevant to those points, you can give preference to this. That we'll see when we come to it. First, let's look at Sperling's research. You will see again in the textbook a diagram of a grid. I will just make a rough diagram over here. So there's a screen which is represented in a diagram, and you can see there are 3 rows of 4 consonants each on that screen. So I don't remember the exact consonants, but something to the effect of this. Right? So something like this you will get to see in the textbook. This is the stimulus which was used by Sperling. Okay, if you're remembering this study, for the paper you intend to use it, I will strongly recommend remembering Sperling's name. Now, what is this stimulus? Sperling used to show this screen of letters to his participants. This is research from old time, from the 60s. So they used to literally have a screen like a projector. On that, they used to show these grids to participants, these grids of letters. Like we can see, grid of letter just means letters arranged in 3 rows with 4 consonants each. Participants' task was to look at these letters. They would be flashed for about 50 milliseconds. So for about, if I'm a participant in this study, I can see the letters are there for about 50 milliseconds. That's a fraction of a second. I'm looking at it and suddenly it goes away. It's like a flash, you can see, or a blink of information that comes and then it's erased. So I get to see the letters and then the screen is gone. Now my job is, after I have seen the screen, I have already been instructed that I will have to report the letters which I have seen on the screen. So once the screen erases, immediately I start saying which are the letters I had seen. So supposing I start saying M, J, V, P, and then I can't remember what was there. So as much as I can remember, I'm reporting that. So this is simple experiment by Sperling. Participants see a flash of letters, grid of letters on the screen. It vanishes and then they have to report what they have seen. Sperling repeated this experiment with many participants. Each participant gave many trials, many screens each participant had to see, and every time they had to repeat what they had seen on the screen. What he found after doing number of such studies is participants are able to recall only about 4 of the letters. The grid which I had shown, you must have noticed on that, there were 12 letters in total because there were 3 rows of 4 letters. So out of 12, they were able to remember about 4. So Sperling understood that this is because of rapid decay or rapid fading away of the visual information. Just now we had seen that visual information lasts for about half a second. So of course participants, once they've seen the information, it's so brief that they really can't pay attention to it. It just like comes and goes. So when so fast it's gone, their eyes, their sensory register of the eyes is able to hold that information very briefly. So briefly that they're able to recall only 4 letters. But then a question came to Sperling's mind. Is it because the information is going away rapidly, that's why they're able to recall only 4 letters? Or is the capacity of the sensory register such that they can recall only 4 letters? Let's say, for example, even if we were to present information for some more time or give them some more time to recall the information, would they still remember only 4 letters because the eyes cannot look at more information than that? I'll simplify this question. What Sperling was thinking was, is it that they haven't been able to see all the letters? The eyes don't have the capacity to see so many letters at one time. That's why they are not remembering. Or is it because information has passed away very quickly and that's why they are not able to remember and they have to recall also very quickly? So is it about duration? How long the information lasts? Or is it about capacity? How much information can be held in the eyes? So you will see in the textbook also variation of this experiment has been presented, which has looked into this dilemma. What Sperling did was, again he set up the same apparatus. So he had a projector screen on which there were 12 letters. So again, let's quickly imagine these are the letters. So supposing this is a grid which he's showing to participants. Now what he did, before showing to the grid to participants in this variation of the experiment, he made them learn some tones. Tones meaning sounds. Like a beep sound which comes beep. What he did was he made them hear three types of tones. A high beep, like a very sharp type of shrill type of beep which comes. And he instructed them, so he made them hear this beep and he told them when this beep comes, you will have to remember the top row of the letters that you see on the screen. He also made them hear a moderate beep, which was like medium, not very sharp and not very soft. He told them whenever this moderate beep comes, you'll have to remember the middle row of letters. And then he made them hear a low beep, soft type of beep, not sharp at all. And he told them when this low beep comes, you'll have to remember the third row of letters. Before they see any row of letters, before they see any grid, they are trained to the beeps. They are told which row they have to remember for which beep of sound which comes. So the high beep has been associated with the topmost row, the moderate beep with the second row, the low beep with the third row. So after training in the beeps, then they get to see the flash in the same way that it was shown in the original experiment. So once they are trained on this, the training is over. Then they get to see a flash of a grid of letters for about 50 milliseconds. It goes away. This time, before they start like saying which are the letters they saw, a beep is presented. So as soon as the screen goes away, say a high beep comes. Participants know they have to report the first row. So they say something like MJCV. Sometimes, like this is repeated many times, many trials are there. So sometimes when the screen goes away, say the low beep is presented, then they know they have to repeat the last row which is there. So they would say DNSF. What Sperling found is, again he did this variation of the experiment with many participants, and many times each participant had to do it. It did not matter which beep was sounded, which tone was sounded. Regardless of which tone was sounded, participants were able to accurately remember the letters which were there. So now the question of is it a matter of duration or capacity gets solved. Participants were able to remember all the 12 letters. If not, if they were able to remember only 4 letters, that's why they were reporting 4. Then how come even if we are presenting the moderate beep or the low beep, they're able to remember those letters also? Somewhere all the 12 letters have got registered in their eyes. So all the 12 letters are there. The capacity of the visual store, the iconic memory is such, it does hold all the 12 letters. That has become clear. Now how he explained these findings, it's about duration. It's not about how many letters can be held. Duration is the reason that participants are not able to report much. What happens is when I am reporting 4 letters out of 12, so say I'm saying MJCV, as such all the 12 letters are there in my eyes, but I'm reporting this. By the time I report the 4th letter V, the other information is gone, it's got erased. In the process of saying out the letters only, rest of the information is lost. Why? Because like we saw, iconic memory can hold information for about half a second. So it must be taking me about half a second to say 4 letters. By the time the rest of the information is gone. So because the duration is very brief, that is why people are forgetting information from the visual story. This study, why it is given here is it provides support to the limited duration of the iconic store. Sperling study is proof that there is limited duration of the iconic memory. Otherwise, why is it that people are not able to remember the information? He's proved it through both his experiments. Now the question is, how do we cover this study in the exam? There are 2 ways of covering it. If there's a question on sensory memory, AO1 type, descriptive type, definitely you can give this study within it. For description, you can describe what is found. Another way of using the study is to use it in evaluation. Supposing you're asked to give a strength of the sensory register or even the larger multi-store model. When you are giving supporting strengths. You're doing your AO3 evaluation answer. You want to give a strength of the multi-store model. You can say that studies like that of Sperling have proved that the sensory register, as discussed in multi-store model, is accurate. The duration, at least, has been proved by this study. For the paper point of view, again, when they give key studies in the textbook for your understanding, which is very important, they give it in a lot of detail, but you have to have that ability to summarize, which is why writing practice is very important. You must be able to summarize any study in terms of aim, procedure, results, and conclusion in such a brief way, like just giving the key points. Aim ideally 1 point, procedure 1 or 2 points, results 1 or 2 points, and conclusion in 1 point. You should have that knack to be able to write that way. Then only you'll be able to cover properly. Because if you're going to cover the whole study as given in the textbook, in the paper, it's going to be extremely difficult. That much word count, that much timing is not available to write. So don't take studies to be like rote learned as they are in the book. You have to learn from them and be able to give your summary in the paper. More about this you can see in the exam videos which I have covered. Okay, let's move ahead from here. Okay, before I forget, also evaluation of studies is possible. Like not only the study by itself is an evaluation point for AO3 because it's supporting the larger theory which is there, but you can also give some strength or weakness of the study as an evaluation point. Very quickly, if we take the example of this study, in fact, this is a point that will apply to most studies. They are your typical laboratory experiments, highly artificial, lacking in ecological validity. So if we talk about Sperling's study, when it comes to the real world and it comes to using your iconic memory, your eyes to see information, you will realize that you do not see grids of letters that you need to hold in your eyes. So when we use stimuli like these, in memory experiments, you'll always see word lists, number lists, digits are there, like in the digit span task, this task. It does not resemble the type of stimuli that we need to hold in memory in real life. Earlier, I had given you an example that what you might be holding in your vision in everyday life is see some cars passing by as you're going across the street, or you might see some, say, a television program, something in the movies. You might also see something like, say, what you're reading, like a passage of text, like here, what you are, say, reading in your textbook on the screen right now. That's like meaningful passages of text, not letters in isolation that you're seeing. What happens is, because the stimuli used in these studies do not resemble real world stimuli that are held in the iconic register, it is difficult to say that what has been found in this case in Sperling's experiment would apply to everyday situations. Now, here what they found specifically in Sperling's experiment is that the iconic register can remember a lot of information, whatever is present. In this case, 12 letters were presented, it was able to remember all of it. And it will decay very quickly once it is being reported. I mean, it's just held for a very brief period. But in real life, when we're seeing various types of stimuli, like let's say I'm seeing cars passing across the street, does the same principle apply there? There also, no matter how many cars I see, are they all getting registered in my vision? And will I forget so quickly, like so quickly it will decay what I'm seeing in real life? Like, say I've seen a car, say a red car. Is it that I will forget about it in half a second if I don't pay attention? We are not saying when we talk about ecological validity, we should never use forceful language in the papers. We should not say it's not true for real world. We don't know. On the basis of this experiment, we cannot be sure that it would apply to other stimuli also. It could apply or it could not apply. That is how we should say that further studies are needed to make sure that what's being found in the laboratory with artificial stimuli would be found in the real world also with actual stimuli which are there. Now, when we want to write in the paper, so say we want to give this in AO3, again we are going to be asked the larger concept, because in the specification they would ask us something like sensory memory or multi-store model. So how we can present this criticism when we are writing is that the studies which have been done for the multi-store model have been done in the laboratory, are artificial in nature. For example, Sperling study is there. And this is the issue with this study. This was the type of stimuli used. This is how it does not resemble real life stimuli. So within a broader point that you're giving in AO3, that the research has been artificial in this area. Sperling's study can be a very good example of what artificiality means in these type of studies. So not only you can give these studies, in your answers, you can also give their criticisms or their strengths. In the textbook also, there are separate boxes in which they, after any key study, they link research issues with the study which has been given by them. Why they do that is not only to make your research method stronger, definitely that is the aim, but also to help you create your evaluation points. In the UK syllabus, if we take a textbook like Flanagan textbook, brilliant textbook, I feel it's unmatchable. But there things are very direct. Like AO3 evaluation points are given very directly. That this is what you can take for your topic. Of course, international students can also refer to it. But in the official international textbook, it's given more subtly. The evaluation point, that's why many times students will tell me, but in this topic, there's no criticism, which is the only strengths are given. I want a criticism point. It is there, only you're not realizing where it is there. It's been presented as a link to research methods or something. It's not written very obviously that it's a limitation, so you're not able to identify. So once you see the core principles which are there, which is why in this video I'm giving more time to explain such things rather than just covering the content. Once you understand the principles of how coverage is done in the textbook and how you have to write in the paper, you'll see everything that you need is there in the textbook as such. So this is one possible criticism. I'll quickly also give you an example of how you can give strength of a study that has been done for your AO3 evaluation. No doubt Sperling's research has this limitation of being ecologically less valid. But coming to a strength of this study, again which you'll find in any laboratory experiment, is manipulation. Why we do laboratory experiments? If your research methods are strong, you will know very well. We do such experiments to establish clear cause-effect relationships, to do manipulation. Only when we manipulate a variable can we say it is the cause of something. Here what Sperling has manipulated is the presentation of letters. Just a minute. So presentation of letters has been manipulated by Sperling. What he has manipulated is what they have to recall from that presentation. Like, do they have to remember the top row, the middle row, or the bottom row? Because he's played 3 different tones. The manipulation is which tone he plays, and in response to that, are they able to report the letters? So manipulation of the tone or which row is to be remembered is the independent variable, the cause. The dependent variable is their reporting or their recall of the letters. Now, can he say that because of which row they were expected to recall, they were able to recall that row? Yes, because he's manipulated that. He's asked them specifically for that row, and that is what they've reported. That means there's a clear cause effect between what is being asked to recall and what is being reported by the participants. If instead of an experiment, say it was an observational study, and Sperling would just randomly like pick up anyone on the road like a survey and ask, what did you just see? Just tell me what you just saw. He wouldn't be able to say that just now because they've seen something like, say, a car going by. Say someone says, I just saw a car going by. That the cause for remembering is because they have been asked about the car. There could be something else. Maybe they paid a lot of attention to that car when that was going by. How would Sperling know that it's not the attention? Here, because he's manipulated, he's decided everything for how long he's going to show, exactly what he's going to ask them. He can say that is the cause of what they're reporting. So in this experiment, a clear cause-effect relationship has been established between presentation of stimuli and their recall. That means whatever is presented, like broadly, like theoretical generalization we can draw from this is, whatever is presented in visual memory, that will be recalled. So what is held in visual memory, that is what is reported. These type of cause effects we can get only in lab experiments. Like I just gave an example of a survey, their cause effect cannot be established. When we just ask someone something, we don't know for what cause they are reporting that. So that's a strength. Manipulation helps to establish cause effect, and that results in more valid results. So you could say that many such studies have been done. Again, if they're asking you for the larger MSM model, Many studies have been done which have established clear cause effects. One of them is Sperling study, in that this is what is manipulated, this is the dependent variable, and this increases validity, internal validity of the research done in this area. We know ecological validity is poor, but at least internal validity is good. So we can explain it that way. Okay, then in the textbook, we also have studies of echoic memory, which I'll come to soon. But before that, let us quickly revise some base concepts. What we've seen right now is the duration of sensory register, but specifically we have seen of iconic register. Duration of any store or any register in memory is how long information can be held in that. No doubt these registers are holding information, but till when or for how long? That answer is given through its duration. So for iconic memory, for example, we saw half a second is the duration. Then comes capacity. Capacity means how much information can be held in that register. Like we saw just now in Sperling's experiment, as many letters as were shown, participants were able to recall all of those. So it seems that the capacity is very good. A lot of letters or a lot of information can be held in the iconics too. And one more is coding. Coding means in what form information can be held. Every store which is given by Atkinson and Shiffrin, so sensory register, STM, LTM, they all have a different form or a different way type in which they can hold information. Before I come to the coding for sensory register, I want you to know these base concepts which are there. They can be asked in general in the paper also. In my most recent exam video which I've posted, there was a question, what do we mean by duration of a register? What do we mean by capacity of a register? So no doubt you have to know individually for sensory, short term and all. They can ask what's duration of STM or what's duration of sensory register. But in general, what do we mean by duration or capacity? Even those type of questions can come in the paper. So this is also very important. In fact, repeatedly they've been asked in the paper. What are these? These are three parameters or three features on which we can distinguish between the various storages given in Atkinson and Shiffrin model. For example, sensory register has its own duration, capacity and coding, whereas STM has a totally different duration, capacity and coding. So these features are what distinguish these stores from each other. As we see more, you will be able to see the difference. Okay, now coming to coding or form of information in sensory register. Our sensory registers create exact replicas or exact representations of what we see in the real world. So coding is in raw form. When I see a car passing by the street, in my eyes, exact image of the car is printed. Right? We don't, let's say, for example, don't translate it into auditory form, which we'll see ahead in short-term memory. I don't, like in my eyes, there's no capacity to hear or think like a red car went by. So I don't like hear it in my mind, red car. I actually see the image of the red car till it fades away from my eyes. So in sensory registers, information is said to be coded in raw form. As it is in real life, same way it is there. Another example can be of the ears. If I hear a tone in my ear, I remember exactly how the tone is. I don't translate it to it's a high tone. So I don't speak to myself or think it's a high tone and remember that way. I can actually hear the tone that is there in my ears. So that is the form of coding. When we contrast, when we say STM, LTM, you will be able to contrast and see their information is changed. It's not held in raw form, it's processed a little before it is stored. In echoic memory studies, there is this study, I forgot the name of the researcher, perhaps Conrad or maybe someone else, maybe I'm confusing, who has shown that processed information cannot be held in sensory registers. It has to only be held in raw form. Sensory registers, after all, they are your sense organs. They are not your brain. They cannot understand information. They can only see your things as they are. So they will hold information that way only. Okay, and then capacity and the duration I've already explained. For sensory registers, broadly, of course, it's little different for individual registers, but broadly what you can remember is they all have a large capacity Lots of experiments have been done on this, how much information can be seen at one time with the eyes, heard at one time with the ears. It's found to be almost unlimited. Like imagine you're sitting in a room and 10 types of sounds are coming. There's some traffic noise coming from the street, people are talking, someone's playing the radio, some hammering is going on around, and you can hear on the walls. 10 types of sounds are coming in the room. Your ears are picking up all of these. Many times you'll complain also. So many sounds were coming. How do you know so many sounds were coming? That means your ears are hearing all the sounds which are there. So that makes it seem like unlimited amount of information can be gathered by your sensory registers. So you can think of the capacity or how much information can be held as large or unlimited. Duration we've seen very limited in milliseconds, like half a second. When we say for iconic memory, it means 500 milliseconds. So less, yes, of course, for hearing they found it to be 2 to 3 seconds. But again, experiments have been discrepant. Some have suggested that it is even milliseconds, even for years. So duration is less. Sensory registers, sense organs can hold lot of information, but for very less time, like we just saw in Sperling's study. And in terms of coding, like I said, it's the raw form of coding. As information is seen, heard, tasted, smelled, it is held that way. Now coming to the echoic register, it is not here, but it's there in the syllabus. So we'll just add a separate page and we can look at it there. So now coming to echoic register. This is the sensory memory for what we hear. For using good terminology in the paper, which I always insist on, though not very important here, but it would be better if you can call it auditory information. Keep developing your psychology vocabulary as you go through the syllabus. It will really prove to be useful in writing good answers. So as far as echoic memory is concerned, it is duration, the lasting, how long it lasts is slightly longer than the visual register. Like we saw for visual register, it's just 0.5 seconds. But for echoic register, it is 2 to 3 seconds, which becomes like about 5 to 6 times the duration of the visual register. Now, in the textbook, they tell us that Cowan has suggested this is important, like why it is developed. Maybe there's an evolutionary cause to this. Because in humans, communicating is very important. Our basic essence or most important aspect of us is social interaction. We are social animals. So, communication is so important to us that we need to, when we are conversing with others, be able to hear what they are saying and hold that information for some time, at least 2 to 3 seconds, so that we can process it further and think of how to respond to it. So if what we are hearing was to last for only like 500 milliseconds, that wouldn't be enough to be able to converse with another person. So Cowan has suggested that's why it seems to be longer than what we see. Of course, here you do not need to remember the name of Cowan from an exam orientation. Or you also, the reasoning is not very important. If you want, you can include it. Like I said, there are many ways of writing an answer. But if you write, you can give it's a strong point of why the duration might be long. So if you are discussing under, say, sensory memory, something about the echoic register, you can give this reasoning of why the duration is long. Then they've given us Darwin et al. Study. This is an in-text study given in quite a bit of detail. If you don't remember the name Darwin et al., it is fine, but you can just know what they've done. Again, you can use it as an example anywhere in AO1 or AO3. So Darwin et al. Study, you can just know, like say the procedure in 1-2 lines and the results in 1-2 lines. For in-text studies, you can remember that way. Darwin was basically trying to replicate Sperling's study in the echoic register. Whatever he done for iconic, the same thing Darwin wanted to show for echoic. So the procedure being similar, now he could not present grids of letters to participants to see because he's testing hearing. So instead of that, he made them hear digits. So he made them hear numberless. Sometimes these used to be letterless also. Again, he's also done many experiments, many trials like Sperling. So sometimes digits like numbers were made to hear and sometimes letters. Regardless of what they had to hear, like we saw in Sperling's variation study, he presented them in three different ways. Like in Sperling's variation, there were three tones which participants were trained to. Here, what Darwin would do is the number list that he would present, he would make participants wear earphones, and on that, the number list would come. Sometimes a number list would come, say, on the left here. So, on some trials, the numbers, and what we mean by number list, any random numbers are being spoken out. So, say I'm a participant on my left here, I can hear 9, 7, 2, 4, 3. Like this, some list is being read out. So, in some trials, the way it's coming from the earphone sounds like it's coming from the left. On some trials, it would feel like it is coming from the right here. So same thing, letter list is coming from the right. Sometimes it would feel like it's coming neither from the left nor right, it's coming from the back of the head. Something like nowadays you have these 8D songs that 8-dimensional you can hear on YouTube, and the sound seems to be coming from anywhere. So here it would appear like it would come from the back of the head. Now participants were given some cue after this, after they would hear any letter list. So say on this trial they have heard it on the left, one at the back and one on the right. Means I don't know, maybe I made a mistake and I said that it used to come different. Sorry, in the same trial, there would be like different letter lists coming. Some would come from the left, some from the right, some from the back. Means on the same trial, the letter or number list would be coming from all three sides. Sometimes from left, sometimes from right, sometimes from back in one trial itself. Now, after they heard these letter or number lists, what the participant has to do is they get a cue. Just like in Sperling study, the tone was the cue. So the tone would be played and whichever row is corresponding to that tone, they have to report. Here, they would be given an instruction, supposing recall. This instruction which is coming recall, if it's coming from the left, this word recall taken here on the left means it's a cue or a hint that what they've heard on the left, they have to report that. If this word recall, this cue is coming and sounding as if it's coming from the back, that's a hint, that's a cue that what they've heard from the back on that trial, they have to report that. And if they have heard something on the right here, the recall is now being said on the right here, that is a hint for them that what they have heard on the right here, they have to report that. So I'll just quickly summarize. On one trial, a participant gets to hear letter or number list from three directions, left here, right here and back of the head. Then a cue comes, either the word recall or some word will be said on the left here, right here, from the back. From wherever that cue is given, they know that they have to recall the number or letter list which they heard there only, on the left, right or the back. Now what is found is, the result of this study was that yes, participants were able to recall according to the cue given. So very similar to Sperling's study, participants could recall accurately. But unlike Sperling's study, because that was about iconic register, we saw for 0.5 seconds how much they could report, rest of it they would forget. Here the duration exceeded to 2 to 3 seconds. What Darwin would do in this study is sometimes that cue, recall, he would give immediately. So as soon as recall was heard, they would have to report. Sometimes he would keep a slight gap, like after the last letter they have heard on the list, after say 2 seconds or after 3 seconds the word recall would come. Then they would not be able to remember anything. So as long as he would give the cue within 2 to 3 seconds, they could recall no matter from where they were asked to recall. But if it was given after that 2 to 3 seconds was passed, then they were not able to recall. So from this, Darwin concluded that the duration of echoic memory, meaning the ear register, sensory register, is 2 to 3 seconds. So that is how we have come to this figure, which we saw earlier in the text, that for echoic register, the duration is 2 to 3 seconds. From studies, classic studies like those done by Darwin. Okay, so today I don't have more time. I'll have to stop the video here. I will try to cover more about the MSM in the next part of this video. Let me know in the comments box below any feedback you have, what type of videos you would like to see, or instead of this, if you want to see something else, you can let me know all that in the comments. If you want tuition from me, I will give my contact my phone number and my email ID in the description box and pinned comment below. So that's all for this part of the video, and I hope to see you very soon. Thank you for watching.